See, and I don't know if the school,
Anyone who's,
I don't know.
It might not even
Mr. Morton's got enough on his plate. People are trying to
So
get him
that guy
fired
was already
because
out
they're
there,
wearing
like surveyed.
They're wasting their time.
I
He was
know.
out there.
I was like, oh, you gotta be
Thursday,
kidding me. I was reading all that and I
I don't know
thought,
how
doing
far
some
he'd
work
have
with
to even
Spanky.
dig to find some
He wanted to,
virgin soil.
'Cause they would've
that might have
fired him.
been-
because he was over on
because
the
the kids have to
far
Oh,
end
they
part
were-
of the river.
They were all over
the other
He
night
wanted to
when
get into Spanky's basement.
Secretary of State was over in Sherwood, they went over for
and
that.
that. Saw him over
There
there.
must have been 30 of them outside picketing for fair elections, no vaccine mandates, no this and that.
Well, I got that letter from Mr. Monk about, I'm gonna watch how you vote.
He fired me up too, and I
thought,
fired right back to
Vote
him.
for what?
Somewhere I seen it or had it, that's like it.
I got ticked. I said, you start with,
Council,
you're barking up the wrong tree, this council or this administration will have no
archaeology,
say on
charges,
that.
That's what I said. I go, we're not
And
gonna vote.
then he was my boss. He said, no, you're
Yeah.
single, you're in this work boss.
Yeah, he said, I'm your boss and you will do what I say.
I think it was the archaeology.
I sent him an email,
Curtis
and
Monk.
he did call me and apologize.
I just said, thank you for your letter. That's what I do to Daniel Grail.
I just ignored
No
it.
big deal.
Well, I
Really
was
supportive
thank
of
you
that.
very much.
Yeah,
Oh, I can do
that.
that. I'll try that with
Thank
the
you very
fishing
much.
book. No, I'm gonna watch the letters I get from you.
Yeah, I might have given away a secret.
Yeah, I'm gonna
No,
get
just
some.
thank you very
Hey,
much.
Steve.
There. Thank you very
Steve.
much.
You sure maybe that wasn't in board control minutes, not an
The
email?
equivalent of
Like
email.
Graham was saying, plus for me.
Thank you very
I
much.
read word control minutes.
Where's your,
Maybe I did.
Either way, I'm pretty sure it was for the archaeology.
Like 9,400 or
Why
something.
start all that
Nice, so.
stuff up when I can
it's a
watch
FEMA
the
requirement.
big screen now?
Be getting
Yeah,
underway
you
in
get a
about
beautiful
2
picture.
minutes, because we're actually digging.
Okay. This will be a place for me to long to go to that I can't afford to visit.
yeah, well, I'm planning on going to Hawaii, but let's see if I get to go there.
I'm gonna get COVID.
The odd thing is that they didn't require it when we first tore down the buildings. But now that we have to do some more work to shore up that wall, it like occurred to them, we probably should have done
Are
this.
we gonna do an archaeological study on that?
It has to be monitored by an archaeologist.
To see if we're digging up any Indian heads.
So we've requested archaeological studies from when they built the library, when they dug the canal, but so far they haven't responded.
I thought,
Really?
What would that be?
that's pushing
Layers of
it.
sediment.
Well, they dug out that great big piece
to
of
take a
wood
sample
that
like
was
that, like a
the
core sample.
road when they did the bridge.
Yeah.
That's kinda cool.
Plus they pulled the car out of there too.
Oh, yeah, they pulled the car.
They finally.
So we gotta go in there,
Found their
How
stone.
deep did you have to
we
go?
gotta go in there and dig it with a little itty bitty shovel, cause so
Was
they
it
can
like
screen it all.
excavator
We're
or like
going
a
to
core?
great big excavator.
Not that. We really aren't gonna disturb that much.
Yeah,
It's basically
okay.
drilling some holes down underneath the foundation to put in some piers.
Mhm.
Kinda like they're doing on Jefferson there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exact same.
Big piers.
Yeah.
Those are big piers.
It's about time, that thing keeps
I don't know whether we're
I
gonna.
know.
How deep they go, do you have any idea how deep they are out there?
We'll be getting underway in 10,
Was that?
9.
At least there's no water in that water.
Now.
Now,
Must have just done 9.
it used to be deeper.
2.
All that sediment that's stuck in there.
Good evening and welcome to the Defiance City Council meeting for tonight, September 7th, 2021. Before we get underway with our council meeting, Steve Corbett, Ward Representative for the First Ward, will open us up in prayer. Mr. Corbett.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we're just thankful for this day that you blessed us with, God, for the community that we live in, and God, for our neighbors and our friends and our family. And God, we just thank you for the blessings of each and every one of them. God, as we get ready to do this business of the city tonight, we just ask for your wisdom, that we conduct ourselves in a way that honors you. And we pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Let the record show that all members of council are present this evening. Would you stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any liaison meeting requests or reports? Do we have any comments from council this evening? No? Okay. Mayor McCann.
Thank you, Mr. President. The community should be happy to know that the pickleball courts have been completed at Kingsbury Park, and I have not seen them yet. Probably gonna be dark by the time we get out of here, so I'll look at them sometime tomorrow, but it's my understanding that they will be ready for play, I believe, tomorrow. Did I read in that email? So the pickleballers will be out there in force, I'm guessing. And I don't know, I'm sure it'll be very well reported in the Crescent News on Thursday, but maybe just briefly mention that we did have a meeting here at 5 o'clock with Jason Hammond from the, or were you gonna do that?
No.
Oh, all right. From the Hammond Consulting Group about some of his marketing plans for the 1918 school building. I'm gonna guess we had 25 or so folks here from the general public, from the foundation, from the SOS group, historic homes, just people that wanna know what's going on. And I thought we had a good discussion with Jason. I think the folks had a good opportunity to ask questions and receive answers to those questions to the best of our ability, at least. Understanding that's an economic development project for the most part, and those things take time. But I thought it was a good discussion, and look forward to the article on Thursday. That's all I have, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard.
Just one item, and it's an expenditure of money, two. The first one being to Willis Electric for electric data collection for the Water Pollution Control Division with 23 lift stations. That dollar amount is $24,700. And the other one is to Mosher Construction for the Kingsbury modification and installation for a new pump in the amount of $24,982.
Thank you much. Mr. O'Donnell.
Mr. President, I would request an executive session tonight for to consider the appointment and compensation of a public official, Ohio Revised Code Section 121.22 G1.
Mr. O'Donnell's requested an executive session. Do we have a motion for executive session? Mr. Waxler. Second. Mr. Hancock. Mr. Corbett.
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch.
Yes.
Mr. Engel.
Yes.
Mr. Mast.
Yes.
Mr. Hancock.
Yes.
Mr. Waxler.
Yes.
And Mr. Uresti.
Yes.
After our items of legislation this evening, we'll be ready for an executive session. Anything else, Mr. O'Donnell?
That's all I have tonight.
And Mr. Leonard?
I have nothing tonight.
Thank you. This evening, we do have 3 items for discussion and legislation. First up is an ordinance authorizing the purchase of a submersible pump for the Kingsbury lift station and declaring an emergency.
Actually, Mr. Leonard.
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you. I think that if one thing holds true with when it comes to pumps, and it's usually Kingsbury. And in my tenure here, we have spent quite a bit of money on pumps, and so much so that I asked Mr. Leonard to come tonight to give detail if need be. But this is an emergency expenditure of money that we've actually had to commit to right away. I'm asking council to approve this purchase order. But each and every time, and I'm not quite sure the number of pumps at Kingsbury, there's 3 or 4. And I think that it's imperative that we make sure that these are all functional, because we don't use them all at the same time. When one goes out, the other one comes on. But if you look at the flow of And what that particular pump station handles, that pump station will handle all the flow from the north side. That pump station actually handles the flow from the south and the west, and it comes across the Auglaize River to the pump station. So it handles a tremendous amount of inflow, and it's critical because it flows it back to the wastewater treatment plant where it's processed. These expenditures have actually gone on from time to time. I know that we've had different pumps. We've had Ybarra pumps, we've had flight pumps. I mean, this is a new type of pump that I think we're using today. Mark, I don't know if you have any comments. You might want to comment, just to give some better detail, but this is something that is a constant with the wastewater division. And it's critical because it's a pinch point where all the flow actually goes to that station and is pumped back to the station. So any other comments?
Just, that lift station takes 80% of our wastewater flow in the entire city. We have two Hydromatic 150 horsepower pumps in there. Hydromatic has stopped making large pumps because of the problems they've had with them. We could still get parts to rebuild them, but every time we're rebuilding one, you're upwards of $6,000–7,000 to put seals and bearings. If you have to go to impellers alone can be $5,000 or $6,000. This particular pump, KSB, is manufactured in Germany. I thought the engineer took a lot more time on, we measured the entire force main out to the plant, counted all the 90s, all the elbows and everything to get the head that the pump will be pumping against. Sent all that to the engineers in Germany, and they actually built this pump for us. So we're hoping that longevity on this pump, they're used quite a bit in Ohio. So I did budget $100,000 for this project in the 2021 budget.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Leonard or Mr. Wexler?
How old are the pumps we just we just did them when?
Well, they're probably, the oldest one is probably 12 years old and the other one's probably 8 years old.
I thought we did them since then.
And we've rebuilt them. And I know we've put new pumps in at Kettering, and those were expensive also. That's another big lift station. So,
Do we keep any of these pumps that we replace as a backup?
so like the Ybarras that we had in there, they have like a 3-inch stainless steel shaft. That shaft snapped, and I was looking at a machine shop to build a new shaft and rebalance the pump casings and everything, and it was upwards of $22,000 to repair a pump that we had that had already been repaired several times. So when we switched to the Hydromatics, we had to change out the base, the mounting base. So it's not like you can just, so now where the two Hydromatics are, they're set up for Hydromatics. That's why we have to hire Mosier to go in and rebuild a base and the piping coming out of the wet well and that for this new pump. So it's, you know, if we keep a pump, it's just really not practical. It's too hard to just swap them in and out. It's really hard to try to give you a mental picture of what we actually have there. But if any of you ever want a tour of that, you're talking, you know, these pumps come in and they're like 2 tons. These pumps are huge. And we're lifting them from an overhead girder and dropping them 5 stories down into the ground, into a dry pit. And then working down there, getting them mounted so they can be hooked to the suction pipes coming out of the wet well, which is on either side of you. So it's an interesting tour. If any of you want, and I'm not saying that to be facetious or anything, it's
Actually, it's something you really should do because it's rather fascinating. It's something that you wouldn't have ever thought about because you just see this little house on the hill there. and it's much more than that. So I think you should probably take him up on that.
So
Honestly, it's
the
interesting.
pump that we're buying though, this won't ever change with any of them, or is this just a takeover if one of them go down?
It's, the bar is down right now. So right now I have 250 hydromatics and I have a 54 horsepower Ibarra that's down there that hardly ever gets used. It's really, it's 54 horsepower and it's like this big, but it's kind of like a sump pump.
So this is gonna replace that?
No, so this will replace the 200 horsepower Ibarra that's completely shot and it wasn't rebuildable.
Okay.
And then the 250 hydromatics, we wanna take some of the runtime, wanna stop running those so much. Because, they have to be cooled with cool water, like we had the, we lost water pressure here, 2 months ago or something? Well, we didn't think to go down there and check and our packing water stopped cooling the pump and it actually burned up the pump. We had to set it in, get it rewound and get the leads redone and whatnot. So we wanna try to take some of the runtime off of those 150 hydromatics and let this newer pump be the workhorse. And then what it does is you have one pump, dry weather flow, we pump about 3.2 million out to the plant. Wet weather flow, we can pump over 12 million. So dry weather flow, one pump's fine. And they're on VFD, so it's only running at about 43 hertz. It's not running at full 60 hertz. Then as soon as it starts raining and we get this huge influx of water, then now all of a sudden we got 3 pumps running, you know.
Okay, I was just curious, I didn't think they was that old, but maybe it just stayed in my mind, maybe it was Gathering we did.
Yeah. Well, I have 23 lift stations, so I'm buying a lot of pumps.
Yeah.
Now, not granted, some of them are just 5 horsepower pumps.
Okay.
Thank you.
Long-term for like efficiency, you'll have the new one. Is there anything else like in the short or long-term that needs to be done to make sure that it keeps it running? Is there something, I guess I don't understand. I understand what you're saying about you have all these different things, but if this is gonna be probably one of the main horses, that the new one, is there something else that you have to do, prepare for the long term, I guess?
Well, that is all in a long-term plan of possibly putting in a new Kingsbury lift station.
We've had discussions about that, taking some of that flow away from that particular pump station, downsizing the Kingsbury pump station. I mean, it's handling 80%, maybe you go down to 60, 50, whatever. I mean, in the third piece of legislation, we'll talk a little bit about the monitoring and where the system flows, but trying to figure out exactly what the best method of diverting some of that flow and sending it, maybe keeping it on the north side and sending it over and crossing by the 281 bridge, things like that. That's all in the planning process.
So if council wants a tour, you'll give council a tour?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I do have an elevator on that side, but I gotta warn you, once it passes the floor, it's completely I mean, you're in a cage, but you're looking out.
Thank you.
5 stories down.
Thank you.
Or there's a lot of steps, so if you need a good cardio in the morning, meet me over there, I'll wait up top with a timer. There's a lot of steps.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Leonard? If not, Mr. Uresti?
Call.
There's no other questions. We have a motion to suspend and call.
Second.
Second, Mr. Mast. Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Mast?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mr. Uresti?
Yes.
And Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
And
Motion to adopt.
Oops.
motion to adopt, Mrs. Crutch. Second, Mr. Corbett. Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Mast?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mr. Uresti?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
All right. And this motion is adopted. And the second item on our list for this evening. An ordinance amending ordinance number 8175 to approve additional design services for the granular activated carbon filter project and declaring an emergency. Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you state, the proposed change order for tonight is for the design contract for the GAC project. And you will recall some of the discussion we've had in here about change orders. If this were a new contract, $73,000, right, we'd be coming to you for an ordinance approving the contract. It's actually a little different. It's an amendment to an existing contract. So Ohio Revised Code Section 735.07 requires that the modifications or alterations of an existing contract go through the Board of Control and be an assigned writing between the city administrator and the contractor. For a variety of reasons, we'd like to go a step further than that if they're a significant sum, in part to protect your constituents, make sure we get the best bang for our buck. One of the things we can do is tell the contractor, hey, you're asking for all these changes, but we got to take this to the mean people at city council, so maybe you can help us out on the cost. And we've employed that tactic before to get some results. So the practice adds a layer of protection from these project overruns. I will tell you, this is the largest costing project that I've done in my career with the city, the GAC project, and this is only the design phase. But nevertheless, there are situations where there are legitimate reasons to alter or amend a contract, given the size and the scope of this project would be one of them. But you may recall approving the initial design contract, some of you, back on June of 2018. And that was, for budgetary reasons, we broke up the design contract at 30% and then 70% in November of 2019. And just to provide an understatement, the world has changed since November of 2019 a little bit. You have OEPA updating, amending the regulations on what is required on this water purification system, and they actually call it critical infrastructure. So you'll recall executing findings and orders with OEPA last year, setting out a timeline. That all adds some changes to the design contract. And then because it's a critical process facility, this GAC system, it requires a permanent generator, whereas we originally planned for a portable generator. That also changes the scope of the design. And then, shortly, COVID-19, that's not just this industry, but every industry has impacted everything from timelines to labor for delivery to labor costs. That's also reflected in these proposed changes. And then, and lastly, perhaps the design firm is adding value here by noticing some potential efficiencies for the operation of the water plant. One of the things they recommend is a recarbonation basin bypass. Another one's a carbonic acid system. All this creates a total proposed amount of $73,647 for this change order. And your approval would just be noted when the city administrator puts his signature onto that change order.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. O'Donnell? Mr. Hancock?
Do you foresee any additional changes similar to this in the future?
Yes. And that's not me, I'm just a legal guy, but given the discussions on timeline, it's a very large project, and I would be shocked if we made it to the end of February and not had a change, any more further change. This is actually change order number 5, and this is just for the design.
Any other questions or concerns? Mr. Esty?
No other question, motion to suspend and call.
If we have no other questions, we have a motion to suspend and call. Second. Mr. Engel? Mr. Mast?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mr. Esty?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett,
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch,
Yes.
Mr. Engel.
Yes.
And do we have a motion to adopt? Mr. Corbett?
Second.
Second, Mr. Mast. Mr. Hancock,
Yes.
Mr. Waxler,
Yes.
Mr. Esty,
Yes.
Mr. Corbett,
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch,
Yes.
Mr. Engel,
Yes.
and Mr. Mast. All right, and this ordinance is also adopted. And the third item for consideration this evening is an ordinance authorizing a contract for temporary flow monitoring services and declaring an emergency. Mr. Leonard.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I think the one thing that really creates a domino effect to our CSO program is making sure that when we have somebody modeling our infrastructure and our sewer, it's probably the most critical piece to everything that we do. And if you keep in mind the term, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, that holds true with this. What we've done in the past is we've hung these sensors from manhole lids, and it basically has monitored the depth of the sewer, and when it fills up, it'll tell you how much is in the system. And you can correct me if I'm wrong at any time, Mark, because what we're now going to measure is the velocity and the direction that this flow takes place, which means if you think about it just from a logical standpoint, we need to know where that water's coming from, which direction it's coming, how fast it's coming. And when you know that, you can start to make some pretty good decisions about what you need to do within your infrastructure. And this particular company that we're dealing with, there's a modeler. His name's Dan Gilbert. We've used him. We like him. He has corrected some of the things that I think we've seen in the past, and he seems that he's truly focused on the accuracy of what's happening in the system. And that is very critical for the decision-making of the CSO program. Without me getting into a lot of detail, it's important because it can save you millions of dollars. Or in this case, I think that we want to find out if it's going to cost us any more money or what we need to do. And I think we're already seeing some things that we didn't know about. For example, and Mark, you might want to talk a little bit about weir heights and what we're seeing in our system, and where we thought maybe we didn't have capacity in the system. I think we have more capacity than we anticipated. But the modeling and measuring the velocity and direction of the system and the sewer within the system gives us good information. So with that, I'm going to kind of hand it to you. And if council has any questions, we'll see if we can answer them.
Yeah, so in the past 16 years since I've been back with the city, I know we have done a lot of flow monitoring in the sewer system to get us to where we are today. And we have two types of monitoring, like Jeff was saying. We have depth sensors that are located right on the upstream side of our overflow weirs. And those are at 8 locations required by the Ohio EPA. So when those 8 locations, when the depth gets so high, we know it's overflowing. It goes to our city website, and it'll turn that little CSO red, showing the public that we're overflowing. But what it doesn't show is downstream, after the water goes over that weir, we have what's called an inline check valve, and they're about 36 inches long, and they're rubber, and they open up with the pressure of the bypass. Well, if the river is too high and the pressure on the discharge side of that check valve is higher than the pressure going into the check valve, it won't allow the check valve to open to allow that water to run out. So the water behind the weir will continue to raise, and our sensor's sitting there reading that depth and recording it as an overflow, because those sensors don't know that that water's stagnant, it's not moving. This only happens in very rare occasions, but it's throwing the model off. And so we need to put these different type of flow meters. They have what's called a band on them. So they'll go down in the sewers and they'll put a band around inside the sewer. And then as the water level goes up on that band, it'll read the depth. And then depending on which way the water is going through that band, it'll show the direction, and it'll also record the velocity. So this will tell us if we have backups if we have a pinch point in the sewer, which we're suspecting we may. Like, so Pontiac Park, there's what's called a river siphon at Pontiac Park. Takes all the north side, comes underneath the Maumee River over to Fort Street, and joins in with the big, large interceptor sewer there. Well, you have all your west flow coming all the way out. That's Mark Boats, all the way out there. Everything is coming down behind the Holgate houses, and then joining into that same interceptor there on Fort Street, where that flow is coming from Pontiac Park. And then all that flow then goes underneath the river at the library, goes under the Auglaize River, and comes up into Kingsbury. So we're thinking we have a lot of pinch points, and we want to put these meters in to record the flow direction, velocity, and depth. So the company, we're asking for 8 weeks of monitoring. They did give us a quote for if we have to go longer than 8 weeks, it'd be so much a week. But we're also asking them to move the meters once in that 8-week period. Their offices are out of Detroit and Cleveland, are two of their offices for this flow metering company.
What's it gonna tell you? If you got a pinch point, what does that mean? What's this gonna do for you?
Well, it will tell us that what areas we still have too much infiltration. Because we've done a lot of separation on the north side, East High. I think we got a project coming up on West High for next year. I think that's more of a paving project, but we'll still address some sewer issues in there. We've done, we separated the old Dinner Bell lift station took that old system out of our sewer system. We're getting a lot of water from that. So we did a lot of work on the north side, and we did a lot of work on the west side, because all of Holgate, all that is all separated. So where are our flows? What's backing us up? Is it the Auglaize interceptor coming into Kingsbury Park, now allowing the flow to go down Fort under the river? That Auglaize has a huge interceptor also that joins it in Kingsbury Park, and then we got another one on Summit Street that comes down there. So we got like 3 really huge trunk sewers. Then it goes into a 58-inch sewer that we have that feeds into Kingsbury. So that 58-inch sewer, is taking all this flow, but it's backing up somewhere.
So if he tells you got a pinch point here, what's the next step to fixing that?
Well, that would be for our engineers to decide.
This ain't something you can adjust valves, open and close and stuff?
Well, we can make some adjustments, and that is on our collector sewers. I'm just going to use the downtown for example. So the sewer that runs right through downtown on Clinton Street starts right down by D-Town Foods, okay? There's a dead-end manhole almost right in the middle of Clinton Street, right by D-Town Foods. That's the beginning of that sewer. That sewer flows all the way to Clinton Street Bridge. That sewer happens to be an old brick-laid sewer, and it's called either egg-shaped or horse collar shaped, whatever. It was something they did way back early in the 20s. They hand-laid brick sewers, and it's shaped like this. okay? It's not round, but it's like an egg shape. And they did that so you could get velocity through the middle, through low flow. During low flow periods, you'd have your velocity to move your solids in that. And then during high flow, you have capacity in the sewer. Well, all the taps in downtown come in way up top on this sewer. So we have all this capacity in this sewer, all right? But the problem is this sewer never fills up because down at the Clinton Street Bridge, we have an overflow. And we have a weir there. And that weir, I'm not gonna give you exact numbers, don't quote me on these numbers. Let's say that weir set at 6 inches. Well, anytime that flow in that sewer gets any higher than 6 inches, it's gonna bypass the river. So we could potentially raise this weir to a foot. Now we're using 6 more inches of that sewer from the Clinton Street Bridge all the way down to D-Town Foods as storage. You understand what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Before it goes into the interceptor. So this is called a collector sewer. The collector sewers do just that. They collect the sewers and then dump them into the interceptor sewers. And the interceptor sewers is what carries your flow to the lift stations. So we could do some adjustments like that. Thing is, we've got to be careful when we do that. Certain areas you have to camera, you have to verify where laterals are coming in on the line. We wouldn't want to build the weir up too high and be using
Backflush or backflow.
using a basement for storage. That wouldn't be good. So
I was just curious what this was gonna do for us.
yeah, it could do that, or they could say, you know what, you need a hold. If you put a 50,000 gallon holding tank here, you would knock off 10 overflows a year at this CSO. You know, and I'm just throwing things out there. I'm not saying this is what the conclusion's going to be, but it could be something like that. So, and you know, EPA wants you to measure. If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. So, and we have to have the most accurate data that we can. And I'm really happy with this modeler. He's been keeping us more involved in the past. He's asked us a lot more questions. He's had our crews go out and field verify. We've probably done 50 confined space entries down into the sewers, getting accurate measurements, making sure that our maps, our GISs and everything are matching. Because he looks at things and he goes, it just doesn't make sense. Can you send a crew out to measure? And we do. And he's kept us more involved than any other modeler. So.
Do we have any follow-up questions or concerns? Mr. Corbett?
No further questions, sir. Motion to suspend and call.
Motion to suspend and call, Mr. Corbett. Second. Second, Mr. Hancock. Mr. Waxler.
Yes.
Mr. Aresti.
Yes.
Mr. Corbett.
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch.
Yes.
Mr. Engel.
Yes.
Mr. Mast.
Yes.
And Mr. Hancock.
Yes.
Motion adopted.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Waxler.
Second.
Second, Mr. Mast. Mr. Aresti.
Yes.
Mr. Corbett.
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch.
Yes.
Mr. Engel.
Yes.
Mr. Mast.
Yes.
Mr. Hancock.
Yes.
And Mr. Waxler.
Yes.
All right. This ordinance is also adopted. With that, we've concluded the items of legislation before us this evening. Do we have any citizens' concerns? No? All right, then we can stretch our legs for a few minutes before we enter executive session. We'll take care of that before we adjourn for this evening.
All right, so we all go into a tour plan.